The moment a blade of words is aimed at you, your body immediately surges with a defensive reflex. Your chest tightens, your mind spins, and a primal impulse screams for you to strike back, to correct, to expose the falsehood of the person standing before you. A sarcastic remark in a crowd, or a cold rejection from someone once close, is enough to pull you into that whirlwind of chaos. It happens so fast that you mistake it, believing that this outburst is strength. But the truth is harsher. The very moment you react exactly as they predicted, you have handed over the keys of your inner world to someone else. A predictable reaction is always a manipulatable weakness. We often confuse self-defense with the trap of pride. True power does not lie in winning an argument to prove your worth, but in the ability to refuse to place your value on the scale of public opinion. Stoicism does not turn you into someone heartless. Instead, it grants you a rare mastery, the art of the pause. When hurt strikes, the goal is not to find the sharpest retort to counterattack, but to create a silence deep enough between emotion and action. You aren't escaping, nor are you enduring out of weakness. You choose silence as an invisible shield to extinguish the flames of provocation before they can burn down your inner peace. Refusing to be an emotional puppet means trading the ego's instant gratification for absolute freedom. If you truly want to forge an unshakable inner self, a version of you that cannot be toppled by any external force, stay with Stoic Journey. Subscribe to the channel, leave your thoughts, like, and share this video. Let this small action be a silent vow. From this moment on, no one has the right to dictate your emotions. Because when someone has scripted a drama of conflict, waiting for you to step onto the stage and explode in a loss of control, what happens when the only thing they receive in return is a profound silence? Cold, decisive, and completely beyond prediction. 1. Steadfast silence, when stillness becomes power. Silence wears two completely different faces, and not all silence is strength. There is a silence born of fear, the fear of displeasing others, the fear of conflict, the fear of being disliked, or the fear that one is not strong enough to stand their ground. On the surface, this silence may look calm, but inside, it is a silent shrinking. It does not liberate. It only pushes suppressed emotions deeper, eventually turning into resentment, self-blame, and a quiet crack in one's self-esteem. But there is another kind of silence, the silence of one who looks directly at the insult, recognizes the manipulation, and understands exactly what is happening, yet chooses not to react immediately. They know that the first impulse is rarely the voice of reason. This silence is not a bowing of the head, it is standing still so as not to be dragged away. It is not helplessness, it is reclaiming the right to choose the timing and the manner of the response. The deepest difference lies in the inner state that follows. If, after remaining silent, you feel clearer and firmer, no longer pulled down by the emotions of others, then that is the silence of character. But if you feel smaller, humiliated, and continue to let the opponent weigh heavy on your mind, then it was merely the endurance of a wounded ego. Stoicism does not teach us to be mute and suffer. It teaches us to pause the rhythm so we do not react like puppets, and from that stillness, to act with a clearer will. Therefore, silence never means letting others overstep. There are times when, if you only remain silent without setting boundaries, the opponent will mistake your composure for weakness and your self-control for submissiveness. In those moments, what is needed is not a loud argument, but a colder shift, from silence to boundaries. No many words are needed, no lengthy explanations, just a statement clear enough to close the door on intrusion. "I will not continue this conversation if you maintain that tone." Or, "We can speak again when we are both calmer." Such words carry no energy of anger, but the weight of someone who knows exactly what they are protecting. That is when silence ceases to be a passive void and becomes the foundation of a commanding presence. In reality, many conflicts shift entirely simply because one person refuses to follow the pre-written script. Imagine a meeting where a colleague intentionally drops a sarcastic comment to put you on the defensive. If you fire back, the atmosphere instantly turns tense and you become part of the chaos. But if you stop, maintain eye contact without changing your expression and calmly say, "If you have professional feedback, let's discuss it after the meeting," the entire battlefield flips. People stop looking at the flaw the other person tried to highlight. They start seeing who is provoking and who is maintaining their poise. The same applies to intimate relationships. Sometimes a cold text message, sharp as a blade, makes you want to write a long paragraph to defend yourself or pour out your pain. But many breakups happen not because of the hurt itself, but because of how people react while hurting. If you stop, refuse to reply in the heat of the moment, and let a few hours pass until your heart rate slows, then simply text, "I'm ready to talk," when we both want to understand each other, not hurt each other more. You have changed the entire trajectory of the conflict. You are no longer dragged by their emotions. You force the dialogue, if it continues, to move to a more mature plane. Ultimately, steadfast silence is not about disappearing in the face of conflict. It is about refusing to step onto the stage where others have prepared a role for your loss of control. It is the ability to keep your inner world from being forced to run at the chaotic rhythm of the outside. And sometimes, the very moment you don't react as they expect, don't rage as they calculated, and don't explain as they waited for, is the moment all the power quietly returns to your hands. 2. The art of the pause. At the thin line between provocation and impulsive action, the true power of Stoic philosophy emerges in the form of a pause. When toxic energy is aimed directly at you, a cold, attacking message or an irrational slur, old habits will urge your hands to strike back, forcing you to speak now, answer now, prove yourself now. But inner discipline does not lie in burying resentment, nor in being hushed by the fear of conflict. Supreme self-control begins the moment you actively place a silent space between what just happened and how you decide to respond. In that brief but invaluable gap, you are no longer a puppet pulled by emotional strings. You stop the reflex to begin the choice. We must face a cold but liberating truth. You cannot stop people from treating you poorly, but you can decide how deep that event penetrates your mind. The pause you create is the invisible shield that halts the momentum of hurt. Instead of exhausting yourself scrutinizing others' motives, this lesson forces you to pivot your perspective entirely. Pull your attention inward to recognize the only thing truly in your hands: your interpretation, your thoughts, and your own stability. You step back, standing as a silent observer, seeing the anger sparking in your chest, recognizing the impulse to argue but resolutely refusing to be swept away by the wave. This stillness is absolutely not cowardly avoidance, for avoidance is always born of fear. On the contrary, a purposeful pause carries an overwhelming presence and a wordless weight. It sends a steel-clad message without making a sound. Your inner balance is too precious to be traded for cheap provocation. Overcoming the urge to draw your sword in return requires a far more intense restraint than letting anger flow. And in the moment you stand firm in silence, prioritizing your peace over the instant thirst for correction, you have quietly stripped the opponent of their strongest weapon. You establish a psychological no-fly zone, a realm of stillness, where all external intrusions fall helpless before a person who can no longer be easily manipulated. 3. Breaking the pattern and dominating the narrative. The power of that invisible void does not stop at protecting your inner world. It silently dismantles the entire offensive rhythm of your opponent. Most conflicts operate on a familiar mechanism. One side hurls a provocation, the other immediately reacts, and words escalate into chaos. Those who seek to hurt you usually have a pre-written script in their heads, where you are cast as the bitter, defensive, and out-of-control victim. But the moment you refuse to step onto that stage, refusing to grant them the reaction they crave, the entire tempo of the attack is instantly broken. Imagine a moment when someone deliberately insults you in public, waiting to see a flash of anger or a desperate rush to explain yourself. Instead of handing them that sensitive performance, you respond only with a flat, steady gaze and absolutely no explanation. Their attack then becomes like a full-force punch thrown into thin air. No resistance, no retaliation, no fuel for the fire to keep burning. It is this very stillness that creates an invisible but suffocating pressure, causing the surrounding atmosphere to collapse. In the moment their expectation is severed, they lose the leverage to continue, left alone with the absurdity of their own behavior. The core technique of mastering the narrative lies in decisively stripping away the only fuel that feeds any conflict: your emotional involvement. You do not need to raise your voice to establish a boundary. You do not need noise to demonstrate power. By simply refusing to react according to the familiar pattern, you derail the entire trajectory set by your opponent. When a person does not receive the predicted response, their sense of gloating quickly turns into awkwardness, then confusion, because what they truly desire is not just to insult you, but to see you crumble under the weight of it. Once that sight fails to materialize, control of the situation begins to slip from their hands. But extinguishing an attack with composure is only the tip of the iceberg. If you are silent on the outside while bleeding on the inside, that stillness is merely a fragile mask. Mastering the external situation is a step forward, but it is not the final victory. The real question lies deeper. How do you ensure that the blades swung at you not only fall short, but that even their echoes fail to take root in your mind? The answer lies in a fierce but glorious internal shift, where power is no longer built on the ability to fight the world, but on the capacity to refuse to let the world define your worth. 4. Psychological shift, reclaiming energy, rebuilding worth. Even when you have quelled the external explosion, that calm surface can sometimes hide undercurrents that silently erode you from within. Humans often fall into a cruel trap of the mind. A hurtful event may last only minutes, yet we punish ourselves by replaying it thousands of times. The silent dialogues late at night, the exhaustive analysis of every word they said, or the burning thirst for their regret. None of these things heal you. The truth is, the core issue is no longer the blade they stabbed you with, but the fact that you keep reopening the wound yourself long after the event is over. Where your energy flows, that thing grows. Every time you wait for a sign from them or ache for a late apology, you are voluntarily handing your life force to things that are no longer within your control. Stoic philosophy demands a fierce but liberating severance. Withdraw all focus from the one who hurt you. The core of this method is not forcing yourself to forget, but shifting the axis of your questions. Instead of being stuck in the obsession of why they treated you that way, you must return to the only question that truly matters. How will I live from this moment on? It is in the moment you stop seeking validation from others, stop waiting for the world to grant you a fair ending, that the process of reclaiming power begins. You realize that a slur or a rejection does not define your value. They are merely tests, exposing the strength of your inner self, your limits of endurance, and your own ability to rise. When you personally seal off the need to be understood by others, a deep and quiet balance will gradually replace those stinging resentments. You no longer need anyone to confirm you are right, nor do you need anyone to acknowledge you are worthy in order to move forward. Acceptance is now rooted within, removing the pressure to explain, to prove, or to reclaim your image in the eyes of others. The source of that strength lies not in avoiding injustice, but in the ability to look directly at it and decisively choose where your energy will be placed. When your inner core becomes a solid, unshakable mass, what radiates outward is no longer suppressed bitterness, but an invisible authority, cold enough, firm enough, and clear enough to make anyone who once sought to manipulate you hesitate. Because when you no longer play by the old script, that unpretentious composure becomes the ultimate weapon, silent yet razor sharp, to rewrite the entire rules of the game. 5. The invisible power of unpredictability, setting boundaries without words. When your inner self has established its own value, you enter a completely different realm of communication, one where authority is no longer built on noise, but on absolute unpredictability. Most toxic relationships are rooted in familiar loops. They pressure, you resist. They withdraw, you chase. They sow tension, you exhaust yourself to soothe it. Manipulators thrive on these repetitive patterns. Once your emotional reactions become familiar and predictable, they become controllable. The trap is not in their words, but in the fact that you always appear exactly as they expect. Everything begins to shift the moment someone deliberately hurls a cold sarcasm to strike your known weakness. And instead of defending yourself or showing hurt, you respond with a controlled stillness. You stop playing the old role. You refuse to step back into the loop. From that point, the leverage silently shifts. Do not mistake this composure for fake indifference or shallow mind games meant to look mysterious. True unpredictability does not come from tactics. It comes from an inner self that has escaped the automatic reaction mechanism. It is when the door that once allowed others to walk in and direct your emotions has been locked from the inside. In that rupture of expectation, a psychological boundary as firm as a fortress is erected without a single declaration. You don't need a platform to defend yourself. You don't need threats to show power. As long as you remain steadfast in acting according to your principles, instead of dancing to the rhythm of someone else's provocation, the dynamics of the relationship are forced to change. The person across from you will realize their old tricks have lost their potency against someone who no longer cares to step onto that stage. The practical lesson is clear. Stop adjusting your behavior to control how others see you, and start responding based on what truly protects your own peace. When you strip away the privilege of others to access your internal turbulence, you do more than neutralize their verbal blades. You force them back to face their own void. A person can only manipulate you as long as they can reach the places where you are most easily shaken. Once that area becomes impenetrable territory, every external effort to stir it becomes meaningless. Yet even this profound stillness is not the final destination. The ultimate goal of Stoic discipline is not just to make you harder to attack, but to lead you to a state of freedom deeper than that, where no gaze, no slur, and no external force has the power to reach the core of your serenity. 6. Freedom and the untouchable state. When invisible boundaries are set and the need to manipulate external outcomes has dissolved, you officially enter a new territory of freedom. Absolute freedom is never meant that everything in the world must go your way, or that those who mistreated you will bow their heads and admit wrong. The harshest, yet most brilliant form of freedom appears only at the moment you realize your peace is no longer a sacrificial lamb for any external upheaval. When looking directly at someone who has just insulted you to strip away your confidence, instead of exhausting yourself to prove them wrong, you simply withdraw your entire attention. You no longer need a late apology. You no longer demand their understanding. You no longer wait for a happy ending to allow yourself to be at peace. The knot is not untied by the hand that tied it. It vanishes because you decided to cut the invisible cord. At this level of consciousness, the ultimate method requires a cold detachment, severing the desire to control what was never yours to begin with. The root of weakness often lies in waiting for the world to behave properly so that one's inner self can be quiet. But when you proactively seal off the need to be explained, understood, or treated fairly as you wish, you begin to forge an invisible shield. From then on, your calmness becomes something too expensive to negotiate, and your self-worth no longer fluctuates with the judgments of others. It stands still, solid, like a mass that cannot be eroded by external chaos. You are still flesh and blood. You still feel the impacts of life, but you no longer allow those impacts to dictate your posture. Ultimate strength does not lie in the absence of pain, but in understanding that pain deeply, yet refusing to let it rule you. This is the deepest realm of stillness. When someone brings toxic energy, expecting a weak flinch or a familiar breakdown, and the only thing they hit is a profound, chillingly quiet void, they are forced to face a helpless truth. You no longer exist within their frame of reference. From that very moment, you are not just living by a different rhythm, you have truly evolved into an untouchable human being. Not because you fled from life, but because life can no longer walk in and direct you as it did before. The journey of forging stillness does not end simply by learning to remain silent in the face of a storm. The true destination only reveals itself the moment you realize that supreme authority never lay in the counterstrike, but in the most ruthless privilege, the decisive choice to disregard what is unworthy of your peace. You personally sever the illusion of controlling what was always out of reach, while simultaneously stripping all weight from the judgments of others and the desperate thirst for the world's understanding. From that point, a deeper form of freedom begins to take shape, unassuming and unpretentious, yet powerful enough to shift your entire posture in life. When peace has become a non-negotiable sanctuary, and your self-worth no longer depends on any external validation, you don't just change how you react, you fundamentally change how you exist. You no longer live as someone waiting for the world to treat you right before allowing yourself to be serene. You become a person whom external chaos can no longer easily reach, a presence that is quiet yet heavy with substance, composed yet radiating authority. And that state will always be what the masses find hardest to comprehend, for they are still living within emotional waves they have never truly mastered. This realm is not for everyone, but it is always open to those with the character to choose discipline over impulse, depth over reflex, and self-mastery over the ego's lead. If this silent freedom is what you are seeking to build within yourself, leave your perspective in the comments below. Subscribe to the channel, hit the like button, and share this video. Not just to spread the message, but as a silent vow to yourself. From this moment on, no one has the right to pull the strings of your emotions. And the journey does not stop here. On the screen right now is the next gateway, another video designed to dive deeper into the subtle traps of the ego, helping you forge another layer of inner stability. Click on it and keep moving forward. Thank you for staying until the end, and thank you for choosing to walk with Stoic Journey in pursuit of a self that is not easily subdued by the world outside.